Once again, from the studios of UNO Television on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, consider this, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
Susan Shepard and Marsha Hams are about to celebrate a milestone anniversary.
It was so thrilling and so exciting that day to see that this was really happening.
They were the first same-sex couple in the country to tie the knot 10 years ago. Across Massachusetts, other couples are also celebrating.
It was a beautiful day and a beautiful moment, and I was feeling so embraced.
And now they can't help but wonder what the fuss was about.
You know what? We got married on May 17th, 2004. And on May 18th, the buses still ran, children still had to go to school, the grocery store still had food on the shelves, and the sky didn't fall. And as time has passed, it's really become no big deal.
Since 2004, at least 16 other states and the District of Columbia have also legalized gay marriage. Recent polls show that a majority of Americans now support same-sex marriage.
And slowly but surely, as Americans got to see their family, friends, and neighbors and fellow congregants get married and share in that love publicly and profess their love for each other, they realized this is okay. And they changed their hearts and they changed their minds, and legislators changed their positions.
40% of Americans now live in states where gay people have the right to marry, compared to 0 in 2004. Proponents have seen success in the Northeast, the West Coast, and parts of the Midwest. But opponents in Virginia and 29 other states are fighting lawsuits seeking marriage equality.
Homosexuality is a sin, and they are right. God loves all people, but he hates their sin.
The struggles have been internal as well. For years, Peter Hams called one of his mothers Aunt Susan.
As soon as I hugged him, that's when my life changed, right then and there. So on the steps of City Hall, my life changed at that point, at that time.
A decade later, he's proud to tell the world about his family.
I am Peter Hams, and these are my two moms.
Tracy Brown, Associated Press.
That was good.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, gay marriage. Joining us to talk more about it are Father Jeff Molnar, chaplain of Skutt Catholic High School, and Shelley Keel, president of the Citizens for Equal Protection, community activist for Equal Omaha, and a former state senator. Hello. Welcome to the two of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
Father Molnar, we're going to start with you. How does the Catholic Church define marriage?
Yeah, you know, when we talk about defining marriage, it's important to truly make this thing that the church doesn't give the definition of marriage. You know, marriage has a definition that goes, you know, much further back than the Catholic Church, you know, even before the time of Abraham. And it was really this kind of this fundamental building block of society, where you had men and women coming together, you know, in a couple for, you know, various reasons, but one of the most important to produce offspring and to raise offspring, protect them, educate them. And so that kind of, again, became this kind of this building block of society. So when religion comes and the church, you know, it picks up on this, and now we define that as one of the 7 sacraments, of course. And it's something that it becomes very important not only for the life of the church, but also for the life of the world. But in a Catholic Church definition of it, it's something that really has 3 things that make it, kind of give it its character. The first one is that a couple enters into it freely. If you've ever been to a wedding, you kind of hear these 3 questions before the vows. But you know, the couple enters into it freely. They also promise to be faithful in that covenant and to you know, have the covenant remain for the rest of their lives. And then the third one is that they promise to accept children lovingly from God and then bring them up according to the law of Christ in his church. That's how the words say. So that's kind of the definition that the church gives. It's this freely entered into covenant that is for the love of the couple and also for, you know, the protection of offspring.
Okay, so watching the opening video,
right,
as we all did, and to hear someone who is an advocate for same-sex marriage say, this is no big deal.
Right.
Right? What are you thinking when that's going on?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, to hear someone say it's no big deal, I kind of think, well, it is a big deal. it's, everything that you saw in the video is probably true. There's no doubt that, they can love each other very much and they can, want to form this relationship, but it doesn't meet those qualifications of marriage then. It doesn't have that, especially that component of, accepting children into it. And so it is a big deal. Obviously, we're here today to talk about it. But that's, so like when I see that, you can certainly have some, you can understand why they say what they say and why people believe the way they do, but it doesn't fit into the definition of marriage.
Okay, and I read recently, and I thought this was interesting, that Pope Francis, right, has reportedly said the issue of gay marriage should be studied and not dismissed out of hand.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, your reaction to that.
Yeah, and I think that particular quote, it's been kind of a hard one to track down exactly in what context he said it, but it seems to be something he addressed to the cardinals or some of the Vatican hierarchy. Cardinal Dolan commented on this very quote, and he mentioned that what the Pope was getting at was this idea that the trend of gay marriage in society, especially the changing attitudes towards it, is something that the church can't ignore. We can't simply say, well, we're right, you're wrong, and back away. That it is something that we need to study and we need to engage on. The Holy Father, though, a few days after that quote kind of became public, he gave another interview to an Italian newspaper, and he was very clear that the definition of marriage, as seen by the church, was that it was between one man and one woman. So I don't think he's opening up for a change in the fundamental definition of how the church looks at marriage. But I think he is very right to say, this is something we need to look at. This is something we need to study. We need to understand why people are saying what they say. We need to understand why people, we see these trends in our church and in our world.
Right, and Shelley, it does do just what we're doing here. It opens up dialogue on this particular topic. And so when you hear about Pope Francis at least opening things up for us, how does that, in your mind, play into the trend of people's reactions to gay or same-sex marriage?
Well, it's very heartening to see avenues of discussion open up that weren't open before, or were perceived not to be open before, because it's a very important issue, as are a number of social issues that are being considered today. It's all of us are aware of the fact that there's not a whole lot in this country, and perhaps in other countries as well, very productive discussion on these kinds of issues. Everybody wants to score their own points. Everybody wants to put the other person down, and this is an extraordinary example of someone saying, no, I want to hear what people have to say, and I'm going to listen respectfully and regard each other's opinions as honest.
Right, we walk a fine line, don't we, in having our beliefs and wanting to be respected for those beliefs, but also remembering these are human beings that we're talking about here. And so let's go back, if we could please, to May 17th, 2004, and reiterate why that was such a monumental day in the United States.
Well, in terms of course, folks who support gay rights, it was a monumental day because this is something that legitimizes people's willingness to commit to each other in a lifetime relationship. Something that has been worked on for a long time, but Massachusetts obviously was a culmination of that effort. And of course, it didn't come easy. And even after the date that you state, there were still efforts, to turn that back. So it wasn't until even a couple years after that that it was really finalized in the state of Massachusetts when the United States Supreme Court refused to hear an appeal of that. So that was the watershed day, but there was still a lot of work to be done after that. And it was important again because not just because people wanting to make a lifetime commitment to each other, but the ramifications of marriage aren't just depending upon your faith tradition, but how you are able to do well in civic society. And there are multitudes of rights that come along with marriage as well as responsibilities, obviously. But there are, obviously tax implications, the ability to take care of your spouse should they become ill, the ability to settle your spouse's estate, which is, obviously a given. My husband and I, there's no question, that we are going to be able to do that, but that was not something that gay couples could do.
Okay, and we currently now have 18 states. We have a map we'd like to put up for our viewers. Shelley, what I'd like you to do is walk us through, first of all, reference these 18 states, and then we'll have a few follow-up questions then.
This may be a geography quiz. As people probably know, with the recent Pennsylvania case, the entire Northeast now, gay marriage is legal there. These different states have had different avenues to this effort. For example, the state of Washington first passed this legislatively. They approved gay marriage in the state of Washington, and then it was challenged, and then it went to a vote, and then that came into being in the state of Washington. California, everybody pretty much knows that that's been, I think, has it been 6 years, a 6-year process whereby it's gone back and forth within the legislature, in the courts, and finally went to the United States Supreme Court, obviously, and Proposition 8, which banned gay marriage, was overturned. There's just been a number of different ways this has been done in different states, and obviously in our neighboring state, Iowa, the Iowa Supreme Court is the one who overturned the ban. So there have been a lot of different paths to how this has been done.
Father Molnar, looking at that map, as we're all doing, what is going through your mind as a Catholic, having said what you've said up to this point, and seeing slowly but surely those states filling in? I'm just curious as to what goes through your mind and heart there.
You know, it's, I mean, there's really no secret that the tide has kind of turned in public opinion on this. And as Shelley said, more and more states, every day there's a new, law that's passed or something that's overturned. And I think what goes through my mind, and it's kind of something that Shelley had alluded to earlier, it's that I think when we have these conversations about it, that sometimes the conversation gets very watered down to something you can hear in a song lyric or put on a bumper sticker, and it's unfortunate because, again, I think if the dialogue goes back to an open dialogue an honest dialogue about what is the real definition of marriage and why those who object to gay marriage object, the reasons that they object to it, then I guess that's the voice I don't think is being heard. I think it's the very loud voices on both sides, and that is what I think often sways public opinion. It's very easy to kind of paint, especially those who oppose gay marriage, as simply being bigoted or hateful, and that's not true. It's a very unfair characterization that those who oppose gay marriage may do so on religious reasons or anthropological reasons, not because they hate the other side, not because they despise what the other side represents. And so again, as I see that graphic and more states being colored in, it kind of goes along with, I think, the amped up rhetoric too, though, about how I like the way she said, being out there just to score points,
Okay. And Shelley, there are 32 states remaining. You've been engaged with this. You're obviously very up to speed. What are your thoughts in terms of those other 32?
Well, honestly, I do believe that a tipping point has been reached, and the number of states that have overturned marriage bans since the Supreme Court decision, the Windsor decision, has been pretty. I don't think anybody on either side thought it would happen as fast as it has happened. But again, I think what has happened behind the scenes, as I said, these bans have been overturned or changed in a number of different ways. Most of that has happened as a result of behind-the-scenes conversations, if you will, discussions, the ability of people to hear what the other side is saying and figure out the best way to go forward on very much a hot-button issue. We live in a 24-hour news cycle. And you heard the saying, if it bleeds, it leads. Well, if it's loud and disrespectful anymore, that's what seems to lead the news cycle. So the folks that are, again, if I can say behind the scenes, that are talking about this and trying to figure out ways to best accommodate what are really, really serious, in my estimation, civil rights issues, I think the better we will all do as this continues to roll out.
And just help us out, you are a former state senator,
Former
as
state
we
senator.
mentioned earlier in the program. What are the steps, staying on that track of behind the scenes, what are the steps really involved in each respective state to legalize something like gay marriage?
Well, it's interesting because I think most people think that the bans are all the same, and they're actually not. There are constitutional bans in some states, which means that an amendment to the state constitution has been passed. There are state laws that have been passed that have banned same-sex marriage. There are different ways that these bans, if you will, have come into being. And some states actually didn't have a ban, and those are some of the ones that actually have ended up now allowing gay marriage, because there wasn't anything in state law or in the Constitution, which I think probably came as a surprise to some people, but that's how that happened. In Nebraska, it's a constitutional amendment to that was passed back in 2000. But Nebraska is one of the states that didn't just pass a constitutional amendment to ban gay marriage. They passed a constitutional amendment to ban any kind of same-sex relationship, which means Nebraska banned civil unions, they banned domestic relationships or partnerships. Literally, the language would probably not allow two brothers to enter into a contractual relationship, because the language is very strict. That said, however, the ways that that might change in Nebraska would be obviously another statewide vote to overturn. There are several ways judicially, that might be overturned in the state of Nebraska. Right now, actually, there is an interesting case in that couple that was married, who were married in Iowa, are residents of Nebraska now and are seeking a divorce. And they can't get the divorce because Nebraska doesn't recognize their marriage in the first place. So it's in an appeals court right now. A trial judge said, I can't rule on this, I can't give you a divorce because we don't recognize marriage in the first place. It's an appeals court now, and they're looking to try to kick it up to the Nebraska State Supreme Court to actually see if they can rule on it. There are all manner of issues with regard to this, because there are issues of as anybody who ends a marriage knows, there are issues of taxes, there are issues of retirement benefits, there are all kinds of issues with regard to that. And for this couple in particular, neither one of these are women, neither one of them could get remarried, even if it was actually to opposite sex person, because they'd be committing bigamy. And that's a criminal offense. So here in Nebraska, that is probably one of the interesting ways that this might ultimately be decided, is based upon not getting married but getting divorced.
Oh my goodness, that really, Father, what do you think? And that brought up something I wasn't.
Yeah. No, I hadn't heard that. Yeah.
So
in Lincoln.
In Lincoln. So other stumbling blocks, I suppose, when you do have a map like the one that we put up for folks, where it's not, everybody. It's not all or nothing. It's some. What are some of the other issues, Shelley, that we have? Because I wouldn't have thought about that one in terms of, boy, that's tough to get your arms
even
around,
alimony would be involved.
Right. So anything else that we're not necessarily thinking about when you have 18? Who have legalized and 32 who have not. And I did want to ask you what happens when we cross state lines.
Yeah.
But
and there's another issue, of course, and the way that I look at this ultimately is an issue of constitutional protections, due process and equal protection under the law. And with someone who wants to get married or someone who wants to no longer be married, the issues of due process and equal protection do figure very prominently here. One of the things that the Supreme Court decision that struck down parts of DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, which was a federal law, was that they indicated that there are over 1,100 laws and rights and responsibilities that are part of this, when someone chooses to get married. Taxation obviously is not the least of these. Everybody and their brother says, I'm taxed too much. Well, in a situation like this, a same-sex couple would say, there are many tax benefits I'm not able to access because I'm not legally married.
Shelley, let's talk about something that I know would be on viewers' minds, whether they are for, against, indifferent would be the children, right? So Father mentioned earlier, you know, you have a man and a woman, and they, you know, the thought is they procreate, right? Well, you have two men, two women. Together, they're obviously not going to be able to do that. So I'd like to address that first and get your thoughts, and then we can move forward from there.
Well, I think when we're talking about an entire nation with many, many different faith traditions, and many of whom do not necessarily require that as part of being able to be married, and respecting every faith tradition. We know now in this country that oftentimes people who marry don't have children. They choose not to have children. People who get remarried, maybe a little bit older, are not going to have children. So obviously it's an important thing to protect the children in any relationship. And my take on that is that oftentimes there are children involved with gay couples. Either they're one or the other, children. They've adopted children. Perhaps they even want to be able to foster children. And I think that having a stable family, which is what comes through, the legal right of marriage, is what will also protect those children in those cases.
Okay, and so for those people out there, because this is tough for some people to grasp. It seems fewer now, I guess, than there used to be. But nonetheless, we have people out there who are trying to grasp it. So you have the children who are being raised in an untraditional, household. What would you say to the people who are going to be examples, educators, things like that to these kids who can't quite grasp it, but in the best interest of the child, need to at least try to understand it, right? What's your messaging to those around the kids?
I think you love the kids that are in your family, you love the kids that are in your classes, and you do whatever's necessary to support their growing up to be happy and healthy human beings, and accept the background that they come from, because quite frankly, in the United States, most of our kids are coming from untraditional backgrounds anymore. We know that single parent families are almost the norm now, and they may be. I haven't looked at the latest statistics. So what we need to do is figure out how we can do best by those kids and provide the support that they need. And kids are pretty great in terms of being accepting of differences in other human beings, and they tend not to pay much attention to that. So you just provide them a level of acceptance and let them do the best, and enable them to do the best that they're able to do.
Okay, so Father, when people come to you as a Catholic priest, right, and a mentor and so forth, and I know you're at Catholic High School, and they say to you, Father, this is becoming so much more accepted nowadays, and what does that really mean for our faith, and that type of thing? What are you sharing with them?
And we share with them, kind of what we've been sharing from the very beginning. That number one, whenever you're dealing with anybody, whether they are, homosexual, heterosexual, any race, gender, it's never okay to discriminate. It's never okay to hate. If you do, that's a sin, and if you don't repent of it, you're liable to judgment for it. It's to keep those fundamental things in place, but then to also then say, but we also live in a church and in a society that people are free, but there's still parameters on things. You're never totally free to do whatever you want with license. That's not no society functions like that, and so we can maintain that people who are gay, who are have same-sex attraction, they still have afforded all the dignity and everything that anybody else is. But at the same time, again, going back to that original definition of marriage, it's not that they can't love. It's not that they might not make good parents, but the fact that they're unable to enter into a marriage by the definition of it. I think that's the one thing that I kind of have to keep bringing people back to when they do ask me about it. But again, going back to to really believe that you can hold this position and not be a bigot and not be hateful, to continue to love everyone around you, and at the same time say, but again, this is what we believe of marriage, and this is what we have to hold on to. It's not that we don't want to change the definition; it's that you can't change the definition of something that's kind of written into natural law, and so. I think that's usually where I have my starting point with them. And like I said, being in a high school, this question does come up a lot. And we always remember there's nothing inherently sinful about being homosexual. That's not the issue. But engaging in homosexual acts, then you get into a problem. But I always remind them. I say, but we say the same thing about heterosexuality too. It's something. Sex is best viewed. It's within the covenant of marriage. And that's where it has its proper place, and that's where it has its most meaning. That seems to be where it makes its most sense. So to kind of remind them that it's not two different sets of rules for two different people. It's one cohesive one morality that encompasses all God's children.
And that's the great thing about this country, when you think about it, is the Constitution provides us with due process and equal protection, which is how we are dealing with this issue. But it also protects all of our faith traditions within this country. The government doesn't say to one faith tradition, you have to do this way, or to another faith tradition, you have to do how that church is doing it. Faith traditions are protected in this country as well as people's individual rights, and that's why these are such good conversations to have.
Absolutely. And Father, just the minute that we have remaining, for those folks who might say, gosh, Father, the Catholics feel so strongly about that, that's why you're going to lose people. What would you tell them in the final minute?
I've heard that before. We're going to leave because of this. And I always say, looking at our history, the court of public opinion has probably never been our strongest suit to begin with. But the idea that people do leave, people come back. We go through different things in our lives. I tell people that what we believe to be the truth, so we hold on to it, and that's kind of where we have to stay.
Shelley, final thoughts?
Absolutely, I agree with it. As in a faith tradition, you are absolutely allowed in this country to hold on to your core beliefs. And then you are also allowed to pursue civic protections that are afforded to everybody. So that's what makes this country a great place to live.
Shelley, Father Molnar, thank you so much for this discussion today. We appreciate your time, your expertise, your input. We'll keep our eye on this as we head down the road. But again, I want to thank you for being here.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right. And thank you all for watching. We will see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information can be found at unotv.unomaha.edu. If you'd like to share your comments about this show, call UNO TV at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or email us at considerthis@tvmail.unomaha.edu.